Today, we're diving into a topic that has been at the center of political debates for years: why Trump really wants to deport 14 million people. On the surface, deportation might seem like a straightforward measure for border security, but as we'll see, there's a lot more beneath the surface. Stay tuned as we break down the history, economics, and political strategy behind this controversial policy. Section 1: The Numbers and the Landscape. Let's begin by looking at the facts. Although it might seem surprising, even as the number of illegal crossings has dropped since the late 1990s, the total number of undocumented immigrants in the United States has more than tripled. Today, undocumented workers make up about 5% of the entire U.S. labor force. In some sectors, the numbers are even more staggering. Almost a quarter of all construction workers in Texas and half of all farm workers nationwide are undocumented. Section 2: The Evolution of Border Security. To understand Trump's deportation strategy, we need to first look at how border security has evolved. In the 1990s, crossing the southern border was not nearly as difficult as it is today. Mexican workers often crossed seasonally, and the risk of getting caught was relatively low. However, a dramatic shift occurred when Mexico's economy took a downturn, and suddenly the number of illegal crossings quadrupled. The U.S. border is divided into 9 sectors. Back then, sectors like San Diego, which was the largest, saw heavy traffic. For example, Imperial Beach alone accounted for nearly a quarter of all illegal crossings. In response, border cities like El Paso faced a 15-fold increase in illegal entries. The solution was to build walls and increase the number of border agents. These changes were part of what became known as prevention through deterrence, a strategy aimed at making it so dangerous and difficult to cross that many potential migrants decided not to try at all. Section 3: Deportation History and Trump's Pledge. The history of deportation in America is long and complex. Under President Clinton, about 870,000 people were deported. This number increased under President Bush, who deported around 2 million, and then even further under President Obama, with roughly 3.2 million deportations. Yet none of these figures compare to the scale of Trump's pledge. During his first days in office, Trump set an initial goal of deporting 1 million undocumented immigrants per year. His administration frequently publicized individual cases, often tweeting about immigrants convicted of serious crimes, to build the impression that deportations were both necessary and inevitable. However, the promise to deport every single undocumented immigrant, no matter where they were in the country, would eventually require expanding the focus far beyond those with criminal records. This brings us back to the big question: if undocumented immigrants provide essential, cheap labor in vital sectors like agriculture and construction, what is Trump's real motive for such an aggressive policy? Section 4: The Economic Contradiction. At first glance, deporting 14 million people might seem counterintuitive, especially from an economic standpoint. Undocumented immigrants contribute to keeping production costs low. For instance, the presence of nearly 50% of farm workers in agriculture helps keep food prices competitive. In Texas, with nearly a quarter of construction workers being undocumented, housing and infrastructure projects benefit from lower labor costs. So why would a businessman with a sharp focus on profit margins support a policy that risks destabilizing these sectors? The answer might lie in the politics behind the policy. By targeting undocumented immigrants, Trump creates a powerful image of a law and order leader, positioning himself as the defender of American jobs and national security, even if it means disrupting sectors that rely on cheap labor. In effect, his deportation pledge isn't solely or even primarily about economics. It's about sending a strong political message. This political messaging resonates with a significant portion of the electorate. Polls have shown that while opinions vary on immigration specifics, a majority of Americans support the deportation of those who have committed violent crimes. Trump leveraged this sentiment to build broader support for his policies, even as he pushed for deporting people who had been living in the country for years without causing harm to their communities. Section 5. The role of deterrence and political strategy. The strategy of prevention through deterrence has been central to U.S. border policy for decades, but under Trump, it took on an even more symbolic role. By emphasizing mass deportation, Trump tapped into a long historical trend of severe enforcement action. In fact, he drew parallels with actions taken as far back as the 1950s, when even then, large numbers of Mexicans were deported using military force under the administration of President Eisenhower. What Trump appears to be doing is sending a clear message. If you are in the country illegally, you are not welcome, and there will be severe consequences. Section 6. The human cost and the national debate. Beyond economics and politics, there is a human cost to this debate. The current deportation and border security policies affect families, communities, and individuals who have, in many cases, spent years or even decades in the United States. Research suggests that more than half of all undocumented immigrants have been living in the country for over a decade, forming deep ties in the communities where they reside. On one hand, some Americans express concern that undocumented workers are taking jobs away from citizens, especially in lower-skilled sectors. On the other hand, many experts argue that these workers fill roles that are hard to fill, keeping products and services like food and housing affordable for the rest of us. Moreover, there are concerns about the exploitation of undocumented immigrants, who often face dangerous working conditions and wage theft. This complexity has led to a fierce national debate. Supporters of mass deportation see it as a necessary measure for national security and the rule of law. They believe that enforcing immigration laws strictly is the only way to deter illegal entry and safeguard American jobs. Opponents, however, contend that such policies are not only inhumane, but also economically short-sighted, as they could disrupt critical industries that rely heavily on immigrant labor. Section 8. What is the real motive? So, what really lies behind Trump's push for deporting 14 million people? While national security and the enforcement of immigration law are certainly part of the story, the strategy also serves several additional purposes. 1. Political messaging. By promising to deport every undocumented immigrant, Trump positions himself as the ultimate law and order candidate. This strong stance helps rally his base and shapes public opinion, even if it is at odds with economic realities. 2. Deterrence. The idea is that if the consequences for illegal entry are severe, fewer people will attempt to cross the border in the future. This scare tactic is intended to reduce future migration, regardless of the current benefits that undocumented labor provides. 3. Historical continuity. Trump's policy mirrors past approaches where strict enforcement was seen as the best way to manage immigration. By drawing on historical precedents, he not only justifies his strategy, but also appeals to a sense of tradition in American immigration policy. While Trump's approach has set a tone of uncompromising enforcement, the challenges at the border and the realities of labor, demands in industries like construction and agriculture remain. Whether future policies will find a balance between security and economic necessity is a question that continues to spark fierce discussion across the country. I'd love to know what you think about all of this. Do you agree that there's more to Trump's deportation policy than meets the eye? How do you see the balance between national security and economic reality? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps bring more detailed discussions like this to light.